when you were last here, we talked about the politics of delimitation.
Yep.
We've now had the general election, and we're looking towards actually a delimitation exercise. You mentioned in that interview we did that it takes around 2 years
Yep.
to do the survey and stuff. Could you tell us a little bit more about this exercise?
So the Election Commission has come out to say that they will start this exercise at the end of this year, and the Constitution states that once it's started, it has to be completed within 2 years. So we're looking at a process whereby it has to be passed in some form or manner by Parliament in 2015. So these 2 intervening years will be very, very interesting, because for the first time in Malaysian history, during a delimitation exercise, the Barisan Nasional doesn't have 2/3 control of Parliament, which means that if they want to add the number of parliamentary seats, they have to get the consent of Pakatan Rakyat MPs as well. So there's room for discussion at the parliamentary level. At the same time, at the state level, if there has going to be increase in the number of state seats, you also need a 2/3 control of the state government, which Barisan Nasional doesn't have in many of the states that even they control. So, for example, in Terengganu, in Negeri Sembilan, in Perak, for example. So it's going to be a very tricky negotiation exercise between Pakatan and Barisan Nasional.
That's only if they choose to increase the number of seats.
Yes.
Has it been a time when an exercise did not have, as part of it, an increase in seats?
There have been times whereby the number of seats in a particular state, because the Barisan Nasional didn't have 2/3 control of the state legislature, for example, in the 1995 delimitation exercise in Penang and the 2003 delimitation exercise in Kedah, the number of seats did not change in both states, but lines were redrawn, especially in the 2003 delimitation exercise in Kedah, for the benefit of Barisan Nasional.
I mean, one of the things coming out of this general election is that people become astoundingly sensitive about the biases in the system. They're now, on everybody's lips now is the word malapportionment, and all these kinds of things that we wouldn't have imagined just a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And I think perhaps there's also a sense of suspicion about the institutions like the Election Commission, that it's not going to play fair. So there is a fear that this election, this exercise in delimitation, again is going to be about creating a system that is going to be weighted in favor of Barisan Nasional. Is that possible?
Well, it is possible, given the fact that the Election Commission, for example, can redraw the lines in a way which grossly disadvantages Pakatan Rakyat. So in the state of Selangor, for example, theoretically it is possible for the Election Commission to combine the seats of PJ Utara and PJ Selatan, make that into one parliamentary seat and let's say 2 state seats, and then increase or split up one of the BN smaller parliamentary seats, so for example Tanjung Karang in northern Selangor, make that into 2 seats with half the number of voters and increase the number of state seats there as well. If that happens, then there's going to be an outroar and outcry from the state government, from Pakatan Rakyat, obviously at the national level, and also I think many voters, especially those in the urban areas, whom really feel that it's unfair that you have a situation where you have 144,000 voters in Kapa, but only 16,000 voters in Putrajaya. So I think people have latched onto this, and they really want to see a fair delimitation exercise carried
So, okay, fair but not illegal, right?
out.
Sorry, unfair but not illegal.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So because the Election Commission has a lot of room to play around with in terms of defining, the rural weightage and things of that nature. So I don't think they would take such extreme measures. But at the same time, Pakatan Rakyat needs to be able to stand on its principles, to advocate for the one man, one vote policy as far as possible, so that the discrepancies between the largest and the smallest parliamentary as well as state seats are reduced.
Right, and you explained in the last video that, in fact, this principle, the one man, one vote principle, has been eroded over the years because of the way in which constituencies are drawn. Right.
As well as changes in the constitution. There used to be a maximum deviation of 15% from the national average in terms of parliamentary constituencies. What that means is that one parliamentary seat cannot be 15% more or less than the average number of voters in the entire country, for example. That was changed to a maximum deviation of 2-1 later on, and that even that 2-1 was never really followed, and later on it was completely abolished. So the Election Commission, can refer to the 13th schedule in the constitution and say that, look, we actually have a lot of room to interpret these conditions.
I actually pulled out the 13th schedule and just looked at it. Some of it's legalese that I don't quite understand.
Sure.
But as you explained earlier, there is a provision that allows for local representation. A body of 100 people or so can make representations to this process, or in this process.
Yeah, so what happens is that after the Election Commission comes up with the first round of its proposal or recommendation, we'll have to have a public hearing. This goes to Parliament for everyone to look at. At the same time, it also goes down to the local level. So it will be publicly displayed in various areas, in each state and in each constituency, usually in public places. And the key stakeholders can actually make a lodge protest against some of the drawing of the boundaries if they so feel. So, for example, the state governments is a stakeholder, it can lodge an objection. The local governments authorities can lodge an objection, and also local residents, more than 100 of them signing up in a petition to say that, look, I don't think my area should be shifted to one seat or the other. So that kind of objections, that's what you're referring to.
Could a group of citizens say, well, our constituency is far too big? I mean, we have constituencies, for instance, Sapute, isn't it? That where Teresa Koch
90,000 voters.
Yes, and she won with a supermajority of 50,000, which is, in some ways, credible and creditable. But the question really is, isn't it also a function of the fact that these are huge constituencies and far too large?
Well, I think that the majority of winning or losing is not material during the delimitation exercise. Right. What is material is the conditions which the Election Commission wants to use to redraw or reduce the size of constituencies, because that's usually what happens when there is some thought within the Election Commission that constituencies cannot get too large. It used to be about 80 or 90,000 voters. Now I think the cutoff point is probably closer to 100,000 voters. We have about 15 of these seats now in Peninsular Malaysia. 13 of them were won by Pakatan Rakyat. So I think there is a good reason for Pakatan Rakyat to lobby based on principle that these seats are too large already in terms of number of voters, and they should be reduced in terms of preserving this one man, one vote principle as far as possible.
One of the things that you brought up in the last video was that Selangor is underrepresented at the parliamentary level.
Yes.
It's a huge number of voters, but it doesn't seem to have that representation. That's something the state government, you think, is going to push for?
Well, I think the key stakeholders, Pakatan Rakyat nationally as well as in Selangor, and the state government as well, would be well within its right to want more parliamentary and state seats in Selangor so that we are not underrepresented.
What do you think are the main things that people should be vigilant in the next 2 years? What should actually the ordinary Malaysian who's now, excited about politics, what should he or she be looking out for?
Well, I think the average Malaysian is not powerless. I think the 13th general election has shown that if you come out in full force and then hear your voice and hear your vote, it can make a difference. In the next upcoming delimitation exercise, what voters can do is actually ask people and be part of the process of registering more voters. So, for example, if you increase the number of voters, in states like Selangor, in states like Perak, Penang, where they think that this is areas where there are a lot of unregistered voters who are eligible, and this is something that's particularly significant in the urban areas. Then you can use this increase in the number of voters to say that we want more seats for these particular areas. I think that's one important thing which people should definitely look out for. I think the other thing that not just the man on the street, but especially political parties, they need to look out for instances whereby you can see one party or the other, and this includes Pakatan Rakyat attempting to perhaps shift voters from one place to another, or perhaps try to register people that shouldn't be registered, including people with dodgy ICs.
Now, the Bersih as a campaign for free and fair elections did not include much of the kind of electoral reform issues that some academics have been pushing for instance. Do you think it's time for Bersih to add these issues to their list of demands?
Yes, I think given the fact that the delimitation exercise is coming up, the spirit of Bersih has always been about fairness. So I think this is well within what Bersih wants in terms of wanting to adhere to the one man, one vote principle. Not only that, I think that one needs to go back to the Parliamentary Select Committee on Electoral Reform. Even that report talks about the one man, one vote principle, that the disparity in the number of voters per seat should be reduced.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.